Today we're going to do a video showing how to do what I call the PBL power mod. It's a power mod for the Daisy 880 series guns and their variants to include, say for instance, the 920, well maybe the 922, definitely the 822, the 901, and any other Daisy that uses a pinned abutment washer and piston that's compatible with the Daisy 880s. So again, that covers like your 901s, your 822s, of course the later model 880s. But what it will not work for are the older style 880s and 922s and so forth that use the brass tube that's got the retaining ring pressed into it. That won't work for those series guns. It's got to be the ones that use the pinned abutment. So what this mod's going to do is it's going to increase the compression in the pump, which is therefore going to increase your chances of valve lock, which we'll get into, but it'll also cause the factory abutment pin to bend. And actually just over pumping a factory gun can cause that abutment pin to bend. Now, I know 20 pumps for sure will bend it. What can you overpump a factory gun safely to? That I'm not sure. The old style Daisies with the brass compression tube with the pressed in ring, you know, as a kid growing up for over a decade, we would just by default pump those up 20 times while we were squirrel hunting and so forth. And those guns never seemed any worse for the wear for it. But the new guns with the abutment pins, that abutment pin's holding all the pressure in the combustion or the pressure chamber, and it is subject to bend. With the old guns, actually that pressed in ring held your abutment washer, and it could hold a lot more pressure than the pins can in the new style guns. So what do we do to help alleviate that problem is we replace the factory abutment pin with the hardened steel pin. So what I'm showing you there, it looks just like the factory pin, but it's actually 1/8 inch diameter versus 3 millimeter. Those two measurements are very close, but the 1/8 actually is a little bit larger in diameter, but it still fits. So what I've got here is a 1/8 piece of oil hardened drill rod. I got this off Amazon for just less than 10 bucks, I believe. And this is enough to do quite a few guns. So if you're not going to be doing several different guns, then maybe a cheaper option is if you've got a 1/8 inch drill bit handy, take a good quality high 1/8 inch drill bit and you can create, you know, your own abutment pin. So what we do is we take, you can use a Dremel tool with a good cutoff wheel and take your factory abutment pin out. Take whatever drill stock or oil hardened drill rod, whatever material you select, and set it up against your material, mark behind the factory abutment pin. Then you can take your Dremel tool or whatever cutoff tool you choose. I mean, you theoretically could use a hacksaw, but that might be a little tedious. But in any case, we're going to cut that material off. And once we cut that off, we can either use a grinder to bring it down to the exact length, or we can use files and file it down. But even if you use a grinder, you still probably want to go over the edges with the file just to knock off any burrs or any sharp places on the pin. So once you've done that, and again you've gone back and you've compared it to your factory pin and you're satisfied it's close, the acid test is, since you already have your valve body out, is to take your new pin and insert it into the valve body. And when you do that, it should be close to flush on both sides of the valve body. In other words, both holes where it inserts, it should be close to flush to that OD of that valve body. If it's pretty short, I would probably cut another one and try again. If it looks like it might be just a touch long, your best test is to take a compression cylinder and slide it over. If it slides on and off freely without touching the pin, that's great. You're ready to go. Because what we don't want is it protruding out from the valve body and us scratching our compression cylinder when we install it. So that's the first step in the power mod, is make a stronger abutment pin. So once we do that, I've created a few tools here to aid in this making of this part in the assembly. So these are clamp tools. You don't have to have these. You can use any clamp, but I designed these around a Harbor Freight 8-inch C-clamp. This is $9 at Harbor Freight. You can use it for other things, not just, of course, working on your Daisy air rifle. You can use it when doing brake jobs, compress caliper cylinders, and so on. But in any case, it's $9. Not too bad. And I made these two pieces here to hold the piston for disassembly and reassembly. So it's a tight fit. In fact, with the O-rings on, the O-rings actually are a little bit of an interference fit, kind of like when you put it in the actual cylinder itself. And then the same thing on the rod side. It's nice snug fit. It's going to take a little bit of effort there to push that in, and that slides right onto this 8-inch C-clamp. Oh, there went my thrust washers. So yeah, that slides right onto this 8-inch C-clamp, so that when we compress this piston rod to take the pressure off the roll pin, it holds it nice and straight and firm. It's not wiggling around. Makes it easy to take a punch and just knock that roll pin right out. Also, it makes it easy to turn and position the rod and the piston head for assembly. So we have to line up the hole in the piston head to the slot in the piston arm when we're reassembling. And again, this fixture just makes it a lot easier to do that without it trying to pop out of the clamp. So now that we've made our abutment pin, the next thing we need to do is prepare our compression cylinder. So a 1977 piston rod is what we're going to use to increase the pressure for our 880 style gun. And how that works is, if you look at the two pistons, this is a piston out of an 880. That's a piston out of a 1977. The 1977 piston's a little bit taller. That's gonna give us the added compression. And you'll notice it also is a dual O-ring piston versus a single O-ring piston on the 880. Another difference you can see is that the 1977 uses a square spring, whereas the 880 uses the infamous elastomer spring. So a good thing we get to get rid of that elastomer spring as well. Those things over time get brittle, smear, melt, and it's just a mess. So those are the differences. Also, you'll notice in the piston rods, while they're the same length, the pivot pin hole in the 1977, now in my left hand, is higher than the pivot pin hole in the 880 here on my right hand. And that's because the stroke of the 1977 is longer than the 880. So what we've got to do is take these two apart, swap the piston heads, or at least take the piston head off the 1977 and piston head off the 880, and put the 1977 piston head on the 880. It's a bit of a mouthful. So here I've already got a 1977 piston load it into our C-clamp using our fixtures, and we'll be compressing that, knocking out the roll pin and taking it apart. One thing I'm going to do, or should explain before I forget, before we get to that, is we've got to prepare our compression cylinder for the 1977 piston. With, again, the 1977 piston being taller, we're going to have to notch this air intake slot for the difference in the piston height. So to aid in that, I created this little fixture, and it's got a slot in it, you can see. That's for filing this groove. The slot is a template for how deep you need to cut this groove. And it's also got an inset that goes inside the cylinder here that protects the inside cylinder wall while you're filing. So it just slides right on top of your cylinder like that. You just align that slot up with the air slot in your cylinder. And then what I do is I'll take a small square file and I'll use it first to cut that slot. And once I've cut that slot down to the bottom of the slot in the fixture, I'll take a small round file, because this thin flat file will cut the slot faster than the round file, and it'll just make it easier for the round file to bring it back out to the same diameter as the existing air slot. So once I do that, you want to take your finger and be very careful not to cut yourself. Just gently feel the inside of that air slot for any burrs or sharp edges. If there are, you want to very carefully take like a half round file and very gently and carefully remove those burrs and sharp edges. That way you don't cut your O-ring when installing the piston. So now that we've got our air slot elongated or cut out deeper for the 1977 piston, if you look inside your cylinder, you're going to see that there's some debris left over from filing. So you want to take like a paper towel and feed that through your tube. Occasionally it may get caught in that air slot, so we just push it down and continue to feed. Sometimes it helps if you twist the cylinder as you're feeding the paper towel in. And you'll want to do that all the way till it's sticking out the other side. And once it's on the other side, it makes it a little easier. You can gently pull that on through. Notice it's getting bigger on the top, so that's going to white the inside of that cylinder very well. Again, kind of keep it pushed down so it doesn't get caught in that air slot. And that will wipe most of the debris out. So the next thing you'll want to do is take some kind of oil or something, spray it, discard the first rag because it's going to have grit and whatnot on it that you don't want to pull back through. So you want to take a clean paper towel and repeat that process a second time after adding a little bit of oil. The reason for the oiling is to help the debris, whatever's left, cling to the paper towel. And you want to repeat that with a clean towel each time until you look in your cylinder and it's just a mirror finish. There's no grit or no debris left in the cylinder. So once we do those operations, we now have a hardened abutment pin ready to go, and now our cylinder's prepped. So we're going to again chuck up our 1977 piston so we can get the piston head off of it. And again, once we do that, once it's in this clamp like this, we're just going to screw the clamp down until we raise this roll pin off the piston rod and relieve the pressure on that roll pin. And we don't have to bring it all the way up in the slot or even halfway up in the slot, just till there's a gap between the piston rod and the roll pin. Okay, so I got my gap. Another thing these fixtures do, which is nice, is it holds that bottom of that roll pin off whatever work surface, and it gives a nice steady holding plate or holding for the piston assembly while we work. So then we're going to take a punch. You can get an armor set, a little armor's punch set off of Amazon for not too much. but you don't have to. You could take a nail and file it blunt and just get a regular hammer or whatever, just something that you can use to knock this roll pin out. Sometimes these are stubborn, and just keep tapping. It'll eventually pop out. And there we go. So we just removed the roll pin from that 1977 piston assembly. Now all we do is unclamp it. And that's my thrust washer that I use inside the fixture. Now remember that piston head's in there pretty firm, so we're going to need to take like an Allen wrench or something, or punch, and stick through that piston pinhole and wiggle your piston out of the fixture. There we go. So now let's keep that piston assembly intact. So you'll have your spring top washer, sponge, and then the sponge washer. We're just going to take that 1977 piston assembly, set it to the side for now. We're going to pull our piston rod out. Probably won't be reusing this. Set it aside. And then we'll repeat that process with our 880 piston assembly. So go ahead and... This bottom fixture is tapered or radiused, so it's supposed to fit in tight so it doesn't move, but it is directionally important that you put it in one way versus the other, and it's pretty easy to figure out. If it doesn't go in one way, flip it 180 degrees and it should go in. I'm going to put my thrust washer back in here. Sometimes it's like flipping a quarter. All right, get that started. I guess one other comment on these clamps. You'll see me wiping my hands off occasionally. When you buy that clamp, at least mine came very dry and there was no lubrication or grease on the threads. It'll help a lot if you'll just put a very light bit of grease on those threads running in and out, because dry threads aren't good. You'll end up galling up or eating up your threads. Okay, so we're just going to run this clamp back down just like we did with the 1977 piston. This fixture makes it so nice. You can just hold it in place where you want. Again, we're going to tighten it just enough to relieve the pressure off that roll pin. And we're going to Woody Woodpecker this thing out just like the last one. There it goes. All right. There's our roll pin from the 880. Now we'll pull it out just like we did the 1977 piston assembly. This time we'll try to keep the thrust washers from going everywhere. And my hands are greasy. Go ahead and get that out. There we go. Alright, again, we'll need to pull the head out. Just one O-ring comes out much easier. Find our sponge O-ring or sponge washer. Now we can set that 880 piston assembly aside, and we've got our 880 piston rod. Now all we do is repeat the process in reverse to assemble our 1977 77 piston onto our 880 piston rod. So insert the rod, throw our thrust washers back in here. Make sure we got our spring, top washer, sponge, and sponge washer on there. Put it in, kind of line your holes up. And just run that clamp down. And again, there's no need to over clamp this. All we've got to do is raise the hole just inside the slot in the piston assembly rod. There we go. Alright. Now we got our slots lined up. Just take our roll pin and reverse the process. Now instead of knocking it out, we're going to knock it in. And we want to keep an eye on that roll pin as we're tapping it back in, because we want to center that roll pin as about as close as we can. And the reason we want to center it is so that we make sure we don't have one side longer than the other where it could touch the cylinder and scratch our cylinder. All right, perfect. And now we have our high compression 880 piston assembly. So now we've got our notch cylinder and our stronger abutment pin, and that's the kit. With these three pieces here, you're ready to assemble these right into your 880 or 880 style gun, and it's just direct parts replacement. This will gain anywhere from 40 to 60 feet per second, basically almost across the board. I know from 10 pumps on it definitely does, but it will increase feet per second regardless on every pump count, because again, it's a higher compression system now. This will aggravate valve lock. So if you're already having problems with valve lock, this is going to make it worse. With that being said, I've not had a problem using the factory trigger, spring, sear, everything, and getting this kit to work all the way, I know, to 20 pumps. Some guns can go even higher than 20 pumps reliably. I have had problems though where with the factory fire control group, with the flat spring being left in, so that's the spring that keeps the gun from being able to fire with the bolt open. I have had guns that would valve lock with the flat spring in there. So if I disassemble the gun, remove the flat spring, I've never had a problem. I'm not exactly sure why the flat spring causes that issue, but it has caused the problem with valve lock in the past. As soon as I remove the flat spring, valve lock gone. With that being said, that does create a risk or a danger with the gun, meaning the gun can fire with the bolt open. While we're talking about risks and dangers, anytime you modify a gun, there are risks, potential dangers. I've never had a problem using this kit, and I've shot hundreds of rounds through an 822 and an 880 with this modification. So, I mean, obviously, do it at your own risk. It can be dangerous, but I've never had a problem. So, that's just my experience. And I do it to all my 880 style guns that can use this. So, my older vintage guns, several of those I don't and haven't modified and won't. But the newer guns, yeah, I'm doing this to every single one of them. It's a great mod. It's using the factory Daisy components. It's just swapping out some components from one model to another, and it works fantastic. I will be covering a mod to the 1977s to allow them to be overpumped reliably. The 1977 has a very harsh trigger pull, and the reason for that is because it is running at higher pressures than the 880s, and it's to overcome that valve lock. I've got a mod I'll be covering in the future that will allow you to overpump it even more than the factory fire control group and still have a 2 pound or less trigger pull. But that's another mod to cover in another video. So I appreciate it. This is how you make the PBL power mod. All of these fixtures, whether it be the compression tube slot fixture or the 2 clamp fixtures, can be found on Thingiverse. There'll be links at the bottom of the video. By all means, if you want to make it and got access to a printer or a friend or somebody who does, please, if you want to do this mod, I would highly recommend printing these parts out. And I printed them solid because we are talking about running some pressure up on these parts in the clamp. I would print this cylinder fixture solid as well, simply because it's not very thick to begin with, and we will be filing through here, so it may get pulled or pushed or whatever, and you don't want it to break. There's really no savings to not printing this solid, so I recommend printing all 3 of these pieces with 100% infill. Print orientation for this part, I print it in this orientation. For the lower part of the clamp fixture, I print it in that orientation, the hole up. And for this cylinder file guide, I print it with the open end up as well. And that's all I got, guys. I appreciate everybody tuning in. If you got any comments or questions, feel free to hit me up. There's a topic on this on GTA's DaisyGate forum, and we'll see you later.